Gojo cannot and should not beat Sukuna alone, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Gojo's strength. With Gojo being officially back and unsealed from the prison realm, conversations surrounding him and Sukuna's battles have sparked back up, and it prompted me to really think about their conflict from a narrative perspective rather than from a purely power scaling one. You see, in terms of power scaling, feats, statements, and general implications from the series and Gege himself, I think it's actually impossible to determine who is going to win one way or another. The battle is so close that at the end of the day, a lot of it's going to come down to your personal interpretation of certain feats and statements. And while I personally lean towards Gojo being stronger when compared to the likes of a prime 20-finger Sukuna, the acquisition of Megami's body in the 10 Shadows Curse technique has completely changed the landscape of this battle. But today, I am not here trying to explain the power dynamics of this fight. Rather, I want to discuss why I think Gojo himself won't be the one to take down Sukuna, and the main reason that I'm going to be discussing that for is because I think Gojo doesn't want to beat him. You'll find that at numerous points in the series, Gojo really emphasizes the importance of strong allies that can fend for themselves and grow strong enough to not rely solely on his power. In chapter 11 of the manga, he states very explicitly that he turned to education in order to foster a generation of strong and intelligent allies. Yuji, Megami, Yuta, Maki, Hikari, everyone that Gojo teaches, he teaches with the express hope of making powerful enough to not rely on him. He even delegates extremely dangerous missions that are meant for him because he knows that those make or break situations are really the only way for sorcerers to grow. While Ichiji jokingly speculates that this is pure laziness, we see that this focus on allyship is reinforced further in chapter 17 while conversing with Gakuganji. In this conversation, Gojo says that the next generation of sorcerers will not be limited to special grades, and that he will not be the only person to question and fight back against the old ways of Jujutsu sorcery, something that has already started to come to fruition with Maki's destruction of the entire Zenin family, representing her destruction and rejection of the clan structure as a whole. Once again, Gojo is making mention of the importance of people outside of himself, and it's because he knows that individual reform isn't enough to get what he wants. Just being strong alone and overturning the current structure of Jujutsu sorcery is not enough. If he truly wants to change the crappy ways of Jujutsu, he is going to have to raise sorcerers powerful enough and smart enough to change them alongside him. Yuta, Yuji, and Megami are the three main characters that are demonstrated on screen to get this kind of attention from Gojo, and I think it's mainly because of their massive potential for growth as sorcerers. Yuta in Volume 0 is spared from an execution solely on Gojo's whim, and throughout the course of that story, Gojo puts him in positions to grow and change, even if it is extremely dangerous, to the point where he is willing to send Inumaki and Panda out against a special grade level sorcerer, all to pull out Yuta's latent power and make him come into his own as a special grade himself. Gojo's teaching style is extremely risky and relies quite a bit on trust and intuition, but it's shown itself to be pretty spot on, as Yuta was just powerful and ingenious enough to get a victory against Suguru Geto. With Yuji, we see Gojo teach him the very basics of what it means to be a Jujutsu sorcerer, including cursed energy control and how that relates especially to mindset and emotions. Gojo often gets flack because all he taught Yuji was the basics, but I believe that Gojo was well aware of Yuji's knack for picking things up quickly, and believed that with the right care and attention, he would grow and flourish, as we have seen him do over the course of the series. Pawning Yuji off on Nanami was also a step that Gojo took to further Yuji's development, because he knows that he does not have the time to watch over him at every point in the series. And just like with Yuta, Gojo has shown himself to be willing to take a chance if he can possibly help his students mature. For Yuji, the act of even keeping him alive is an example of Gojo's willingness to risk it all for his dream, as Yuji's capacity for being a vessel means that Sukuna's presence is always something to be wary of. At any moment, Yuji could lose control and Sukuna could go on a rampage, but because of Megami's request, and because of all the potential he saw in someone with Yuji's abilities, Gojo was willing to roll that dice if it allowed him to get closer to his end goal. With Megami, a similar mentality to Yuta and Yuji's training exists. Rather than saving him from an execution or teaching him the basics of cursed energy manipulation though, what we really get to see in regards to Gojo's mentorship of Megami is that of a mental training. Chapters 58 and 117 both show us Gojo with Megami trying to reinforce his belief in himself and mold his mindset into one of the strongest strongest. Whereas Yuta needed the courage and Yuji needed the technical ability, Megumi needed the attitude of an honored one to evolve, and Gojo is very pivotal to Megumi's growth with the 10 Shadows and the development of his incomplete domain expansion. In this example, Gojo is still promoting a somewhat risky idea to Megumi because he is essentially teaching him to be more risky, less cautious, and more confident in situations where he seems to be out of his depth. In all three of these on-screen examples, we see firsthand that Gojo is willing to risk people's lives and his own if he believes that his students can rise to the occasion and meet his expectations. Rika's potential release, Sukuna's incarnation, Geto slaughtering his students, Megumi's own death. All of these are massive risks to things or people that Gojo cares about, but he is willing to consider that and take the plunge anyway for the sake of realizing his dream, for the sake of creating a world where young sorcerers can be happy. This trust in himself and in his students extends to the point where he even believes them to be able to handle everything after he is sealed. No visible worry, stress, or pressure appears for Gojo immediately after he's sealed in Prison Realm because he knows that he's trained everyone correctly. And even though there were losses, even though many people died, even though characters that we grew to love have been eliminated from the series for long stretches of time, can we truly sit here and say that Gojo was wrong? I mean, he's unsealed, right? They got him out of there in spite of all the losses that happened along the way, and he's back. They accomplished the goal of unsealing him and showed that they were worthy of his trust, worthy of bearing the weight of his dream. And I think Gojo is going to ask his students once more to do the impossible and face a threat that surpasses everything they have fought and dealt with up to this point. I think that Gojo, even if he could, would choose not to beat Sukuna on his own. Sure, I think he'll fight him. Gojo versus Sukuna is a battle that I am looking forward to, and it's one that I think we will get. But that fight, that 1v1 battle is not going to be what decides the fate of this world. Gojo has shown himself willing to put it all on the line to help his students grow. And having them face off against potentially the strongest character to ever live in the series seems like the final test for that. Whether it be through his death or through him allying himself against Sukuna, Gojo will not be the only factor in defeating him, and he will make sure that this is the case intentionally. Maybe you think it's too risky. Maybe you think Gojo knows what's at stake, and maybe you think back to the statement of him being the strongest when he's alone. But when talking about risk, he's already shown you that he's willing to take him all. When it comes to what's at stake, I mean, a sorcerer's greatest growth only comes when the lights are really bright, when the pressure is really on. When a technique negating spear is in your chest and you're on the verge of death, that is when you get stronger. When you can't harm an opponent with your base level of attacks, that is when you pull out a Black Flash and defeat your arch enemy. When the only choices you have are to evolve and win or remain stagnant and die, that is when the greatest sorcerers step up to the plate and evolve beyond reason. Don't forget, the reason Gojo is who he is, the reason Gojo is now known as the strongest, is because when faced with real death, with real stakes, he had no other choice but to become that. And when talking about Gojo being alone, when talking about that being at his strongest, how did that work out for him? When Gojo had no allies, when he had no one that he could rely on but himself, did he win? Sure, he was stronger than everyone else on the battlefield, but he still lost. He was still sealed. He was taken out of the equation for over 100 chapters, for 3 years. The moment that Gojo was forced to abandon the idea of allyship, he was defeated. And I think the moment that Gojo becomes the strongest when he is surrounded by his allies is the moment that his dream will have been accomplished. He said that the next generation will surpass the level of special grade, but in order to do that, they need a beyond special grade catalyst. And if you ask me, the King of Curses is the perfect catalyst to spark that growth in these young sorcerers. Even going beyond Gojo's personal wishes, we know that these characters have their own motivations and reasonings for wanting to help Gojo in his battles. Yuji has his grudge with Sukuna and desire to save Megumi, and Yuta, as the strongest, second only to Gojo, feels that it is his duty to not leave him alone anymore. As he declared in Sendai, he plans to kill Kinjaku and not let Gojo kill his best friend once more. The narrative has been building up to Gojo not fighting alone anymore, to Gojo not having to be the unambiguous strongest, for Gojo to not have the pressure and the weight of his world all on his shoulders. And to me, there is no better place to pay off all this buildup than at the very climax, at the crucial point of this story. Gojo and Sukuna will still come to blows, and that fight will be probably one of the greatest and most impactful fights in the course of Jujutsu Kaisen. But unlike with Sukuna, I don't think an individual loss for Gojo is the same thing as dying. As Sukuna says to Rorozu, losing and dying are the same thing to him. But for Gojo, losing individually doesn't have to be the end, because he is surrounded by monsters just waiting to evolve and grow. So while I don't think that Gojo can beat Sukuna alone, the reason I think that is because he doesn't want to. Gojo seems very tired of his loneliness, and this battle against Sukuna might just be the moment that he finally gets what he wants.